This video is brought to you by Brilliant. Since winning the Labour leadership election in early 2020, Keir Starmer has pursued a remarkably conservative Brexit policy. He's ruled out returning to freedom of movement, the customs union or the single market, and made a conscious effort to distance himself from his second referendum past. While this stance is understandable, there's a real risk that, as the British public sours on Brexit, Starmer ends up isolating more pro-Remain Labour voters, who could switch to the Lib Dems or the Greens. So in this video, we're going to look at Labour's Brexit policy, why Starmer is being so cautious on the issue, and whether this might actually be a mistake. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So let's start by looking at Starmer's personal policy on Brexit and how it's changed over time. He was originally a Remainer, and as the Conservatives like to point out, when he was in Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet, he actively campaigned for a second referendum. During the leadership campaign in early 2020, Starmer said he wanted a close relationship with the EU post-Brexit, which would include maintaining freedom of movement. In practice, this would probably require the UK to join the European Economic Area, or EEA, which includes the EU27 as well as Iceland, Liechtenstein and Norway. This was always going to be a difficult position to maintain, because, at least back then, being in the EEA, which many Brits saw as being a rule taker but not a rule maker, wasn't a popular position in the British public. Unsurprisingly, after the leadership election, Starmer moderated his Brexit policy, ruling out a return to freedom of movement, the single market, or a UK-EU customs union. In an article published by Labour in July of last year, after months of staying conspicuously quiet on the issue, Starmer came up with a new three-word slogan to describe Labour's Brexit policy: "Make Brexit work," and an accompanying five-point plan. The first point was about sorting out the Northern Ireland Protocol by building trust between the UK and the EU, which was then at an all-time low under Boris Johnson. The second point committed to, quote, tearing down unnecessary barriers, in part by aligning with the EU on certain sanitary and phytosanitary measures to reduce trade frictions. The third was to support Britain's world-leading industries outside the EU. The fourth was to keep Britain safe, and the fifth was to invest in Britain. Unsurprisingly, this didn't go down too well with either the more obsessive Brexit watchers, who were disappointed in the lack of detail, or more pro-Remain Labour supporters, who were disappointed by the fact that it ruled out a significantly closer relationship with the EU, and are generally sceptical of the idea that there's much to be gained from fiddling around the edges of the current Brexit deal. Nonetheless, it didn't seem to hurt Labour's poll numbers, with Starmer then enjoying a steady 25-point lead over the Tories. So he stuck with it. Last week, Starmer then gave an exclusive to The Express, where he again argued for making Brexit work, and that the UK's future is outside the EU. In the article, he again ruled out returning to freedom of movement, the customs union or the single market, and argued that Boris Johnson's, quote, paper-thin deal was advantaging the EU and allowing European competitors to nick the UK's dinner money. Again, it was pretty thin on detail, but as we read it, Starmer's main point was about certainty. Businesses still don't know the precise terms of the UK's post-Brexit trading relationship. The Conservatives are constantly trying to fiddle with it, and the current deal still hasn't been implemented in full, with more checks across the Irish Sea due to come into force in October. Starmer hopes that, by restoring good relations with the EU and aligning on certain regulations, he can provide businesses with the certainty they need to invest in the UK in the long term. So you get the idea. Starmer's current Brexit policy is very small c conservative. So on to the second part of this video. Why is he being so cautious here? And is this politically prudent? Let's start with why Starmer is being cautious here. First, we see three possible reasons. First, Starmer probably wants to ignore Brexit as much as possible and fight the next election on other issues like the economy, inflation and immigration. This is consistent with polling, which suggests that Brexit is nowhere near the hot rod issue it used to be. It's only a priority for 7% of voters, and only the top priority for 1%. He might also be scarred by his experience at the 2019 general election, when Boris Johnson and the Conservatives made Brexit the main issue and ended up winning a historic majority. Second, Starmer doesn't want to shake the boat too much. Labour are currently enjoying a 15 to 20 point poll lead over the Conservatives, which would gift them a 100-seat majority at the next election, and he might be taking boring stances on issues to stay out of the headlines and maintain his lead. Third, Starmer is particularly focused on the Red Wall, a strip of constituencies in the Midlands and Northern England which used to vote Labour but flipped to the Conservatives in 2019, largely because they're generally pretty pro-Brexit. Starmer will be hoping that, by keeping his distance from the EU, he'll be able to win back these constituencies at the next general election. But while Starmer's conservatism is understandable, he is still taking a political risk here. By prioritising Brexit-leaning Red Wall voters, he's implicitly sidelining Labour's Remain-leaning urban voters, and there's a risk that these voters get fed up with Starmer and vote for a more actively pro-EU party, like the Lib Dems or the Greens, at the next election. Polling from Delta Poll late last month found that a pretty massive 26% of 2019 Labour voters said that Labour's conservative Brexit policy had already made them more likely to vote Lib Dem at the next election. Not only that, but the same polling found that 16% of 2019 Conservative voters said they would be more likely to vote Labour if they backed a closer relationship with the EU, while just 9% said they would be less likely to. This suggests that a closer relationship with the EU might actually help Labour hold on to would-be Lib Dem voters, but also, contrary to received wisdom, maybe help them win over 2019 Conservative voters. This risk is only going to become more acute over time, as voters become increasingly disillusioned with Brexit. As we've detailed in previous videos, polling suggests that more and more voters think Brexit was a mistake, and a majority now want a second referendum on the issue. The latest YouGov polling suggests that a record 56% of Brits, including 27% of Brexiteers, think that Brexit was a mistake, while just 31% think it was the right decision. So you get the idea. While it's understandable, Starmer's caution on the Brexit issue could cost him at the next election, depending on where the polls go. When making videos like this, we rely on a ton of data analysis to interpret crucial economic data and understand political decisions. That kind of analysis isn't just crucial for our jobs. As our world becomes more driven by AI and data, your job will likely require more analytical skills too. Fortunately, you don't have to be left behind if you jump onto Brilliant. Brilliant is the STEM learning platform which can teach you all the skills you'll need in an increasingly digital workplace, from foundational and advanced maths to AI, data science, neural networks, and more. That means that the progression of tech and AI doesn't need to be intimidating. With easy-to-understand and interactive programs, you can level up your skills by spending just a few minutes a day on Brilliant. And you'll want to. Their programs have been directly built around the principles of active learning, so they're fun, interactive, and help you learn by doing. Plus, with new courses added all the time, there's no way you're getting left behind. To try everything Brilliant has to offer, free for a full 30 days, click on the link in the description. Plus, the first 200 of you will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. As always, thanks to Brilliant, and thanks for your support.